This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
And this is Buzz Eisenberg with the erstwhile Northampton Poet Laureate, Rich Michelson, and Northampton Poetry Radio. Good morning.
All right. Hi. So we missed that. We NPR is why we were doing that voice, but now we're
that was my best
we missed
NPR
that
gig.
point.
That was
Okay.
it.
So now we're back, and tonight.
Hold it. How'd I do?
You did pretty good.
Yeah, was that kind of Robert J. Lerthman?
It was very good.
Okay.
All right, very good.
So
Just needed to know.
we are listening to Northampton Poetry Radio with Rich Michelson, and tonight, Thursday. At the University of Massachusetts, the MFA Writers Visiting Writers Series at Memorial Hall. Ocean Vuong is giving a reading. If you are doing something else tonight, you have time to cancel because you do not want to miss this reading tonight at Memorial Hall, University of Massachusetts. Welcome, Ocean.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is a great honor to have you. Every few years, first book comes out that seems to take the poetry world by storm, but even more so gets beyond the poetry world. That's her feat. And your book came out last year, yes, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and it has been a great success. A New York Times top 10 books of 2016. You won a Whiting Award. It was a New Yorker Best Poetry Book of 2016. Profiles in the New Yorker, New York Times. This book has gotten beyond our little world. And I want to say even...
And The Guardian as well,
The
right?
Guardian, which recently did a feature on Ocean. And I want to say that with all the hype, even more infrequently, you pick up that book and you forget about the hype and you get right to the poems. This book has lived up to its advanced word, and it's wonderful to see. So I want to start talking a little bit about your life, and then we'll talk about the poetry and the politics of it all. So you were born in Ho Chi Minh City?
Outside of Ho Chi Minh City.
Outside of Ho Chi Minh City. And in
88.
1988.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah, you're young. I forgot about that. Happy birthday.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Is it today? I don't celebrate it.
Oh, okay. Your
But-
birthday is in a couple of days?
Yeah, 14.
And you came to the United States when?
1990.
So you were 2 years old.
Yeah.
And the book talks a lot about the fact that your grandfather was an American soldier, and your grandmother, a Vietnamese, working in the rice paddies. Without the war, as you say, you would not be here. You came here at 2. How did you end up in Hartford?
Well, that's just where we were sponsored by the Salvation Army. And many people leave Hartford as soon as they get here. Most Vietnamese would go to California or Houston, where there are pockets of larger communities. But I don't know. I think my family's take was that the war was so terrible, we were tired of moving and running, right? And we decided to make a life there. My grandfather is an American veteran. He's still alive. He was in the Navy. And he was, sort of a rebellious 20-year-old in Vietnam, and met my grandmother in the city. She left the farm, went to the city, and then they married. None of them knew that the war would end in the middle of their life.
So they married in Vietnam?
They married in Vietnam. He was going to stay there. He was going to live in Vietnam, right? He was, he had family issues. His father was a World War II veteran with shrapnel in his head. So it was a rough family life, from Michigan, raised in a Michigan farm. And he went to he was reading Foucault and Camus. And
like most Midwestern farm boys.
he was reading Camus' The Rebel. And I think he took that spirit and he fell in love with this, with my grandmother.
And
in Vietnam, you're sure he wasn't reading The Stranger?
Yeah, I he gave me the copy that he was reading, The Rebel, and it's a heady book, but it's a lot to take on for a young man going to war, you know.
So did he come back with her, or because you came back before the fall of Saigon, actually?
Yeah, it was no. It's a tragic story. You know, it's almost like so poetic, you know, as it is. But I think as a poet, I learned that life is already very interesting and full of poetry, and perhaps the poet is not so much a creator but an observer of the world, picking. You know, you're a poet yourself. You see, sometimes you're looking at something and it just reveals itself to you. You're not so much this vast creator, right? But that story is very interesting because he went back to Michigan in 1972 when his mother was ill. It was supposed to be a short trip. You know, she ended up passing away. So it extended a few months, and before you know it, it's 1973. The war is wrapping up, and his family said, "You can't go back now." And every day it was escalating. And before you know it, Nixon pulled everybody out. And communications were cut. Right? America did not reestablish ties with Vietnam until the 90s. And that was it. Letters didn't come. He had 3 daughters in Vietnam. My mother, one of them. And that's the huge, huge gap. We reunited eventually in 1990 when we came to Hartford. But it's one of those war stories, right? That gets sort of lost. But it's I think it's
so
a common.
When you were reunited,
Mm-hmm.
he had his own family, or
Yeah. It's just a wife. You know, they don't have any more. He didn't have any more kids. I think he was, traumatized by, losing your children like that.
Oh.
But they're connected again. But it's a very common story. You know, you look at World War II, you look at the Holocaust, you look at Homer, right, in the Trojan War, and these stories of displacement is part of our human history. It's nothing new. But you said, earlier, you said something that this poetry book, this little book of mine has went beyond the poetry world. And I think in many ways I'm grateful that it has. But I think poetry has always been part of our larger world. You know, we've always, it's part of our larger lexicon as people. The way we tell these war stories even is full of life and poetry.
You're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio. My guest is Ocean Vuong, who is reading tonight, Thursday at 8 p.m. at the University of Massachusetts. Can I ask you, before we take a break so people get a sense of your work, can I ask you to read a poem?
Yeah.
Maybe the one...
Untied?
How about Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong?
Sure.
I love that poem.
Someday I'll love Ocean Vuong. Ocean, don't be afraid. The end of the road is so far ahead. It is already behind us. Don't worry. Your father is only your father until one of you forgets. Like how the spine won't remember its wings, no matter how many times our knees kiss the pavement. Ocean, are you listening? The most beautiful part of your body is wherever your mother's shadow falls. Here's the house with childhood whittled down to a single red tripwire. Don't worry. Just call it horizon, and you'll never reach it. Here's today. Jump. I promise it's not a lifeboat. Here's the man whose arms are wide enough to gather your leaving. And hear the moment just after the lights go out, when you can still see the faint torch between his legs. how you use it again and again to find your own hands. You asked for a second chance and are given a mouth to empty out of. Don't be afraid. The gunfire is only the sound of people trying to live a little longer and failing. Ocean, ocean, get up. The most beautiful part of your body is where it's headed. And remember, loneliness is still time spent with the world. Here's the room with everyone in it. Your dead friends passing through you like wind through a wind chime. Here's a desk with the gimp leg and a brick to make it last. Yes, here's a room so warm and blood close. I swear you will wake and mistake these walls for skin.
Ocean Vuong, tonight at the University of Massachusetts, 8 p.m. We'll be right back.
This is
The Bill Newman Show is brought to you with the support of the Odyssey Bookshop, South Hadley. Independent book selling since 1963.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
Welcome back to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio. I'm Rich Michelson, and my guest today is Ocean Vuong, who is reading tonight at 8 p.m. at the University of Massachusetts at Memorial Hall. If you heard that last poem, I know you will be there. I first met Ocean. We didn't know each other, but last year we both were speaking at the Splitus Rock Festival in Washington, D.C., which was actually started by Sarah Browning, who is from our area here, and every year has a memorial reading for her mother in Ashfield.
Yeah.
I read it that I think last year, and I think you're reading this year.
Yeah.
But I didn't know you or your work, and I went to a panel that said how political engagement affects the writing process, and I was very impressed by the depth of thought there that you gave. And a quote that I pulled out from you is, life is always more complicated than the headlines allow. Poetry comes in when the news is not enough. And of course, that makes us think of William Carlos Williams a little bit. Poetry, well, we know that, if not Google. And so we're going through very difficult times now. Every day, it's hard to get the hope up to move ahead, to know what to do. What can poetry add to the conversation?
I think poetry is always in the underbelly, in the undercurrents of our culture. And I think if we look back at some of our first canonical poets, in the work Gilgamesh, Homer, Dante, Milton, and we move from there to Lucille Clifton, James Baldwin, who's a prose writer, we realize that it's always been upheaval in our human history. And the question then is, how do we gauge the temperature of life in that time so that we can learn from it? And that's where the history books give us the facts. It gives us the timelines, right? War starts here, ends here. But the poetry gives us how it was like, how terrible, and perhaps even how beautiful it was despite terror, right? And that I think is part of the DNA. When we read a book of poems, when we read a poem, we're reading the DNA of someone's mind, a fingerprint, right, of a lived life. Whereas the DNA of the person is simply a biological thumbprint.
I find that very profound, Ocean. And Rich, I'm not sure if either of you read Poems of Guantanamo.
Yeah.
That was I represented 8 Guantanamo detainees over 12 years, and some of my clients' work is in there. Mark Falkoff compiled them. These were they were called cup poems on the styrofoam cups they
Yeah.
got for lunch.
Right.
They would scratch their poetry
Mm.
in Arabic or Urdu or whatever their native tongue was
Yeah.
into that. And then for the most part, the guards, we estimated over 25,000 of them were destroyed.
Wow.
But thanks to Mark Falkoff, who is a professor
Right.
of law in Northern Illinois, he was able to compile some of them and
Yeah.
produce this powerful, powerful book.
Yeah.
It's exactly, I've never heard such an eloquent description
Mm.
of what those poems represent as
Yeah.
you just articulated.
Right. And it's always amazing. I mean, when you look at poems that were written in the Holocaust and people in the concentration camps are scratched on a
Absolutely.
wall or things that, to me, that that they were able to find some hope
Yeah.
or to get their words down in such extreme situations is just a powerful, an amazing thing. In some ways, it almost gives us hope today that people turn to poetry, even in these terrible
Right.
situations. But then, of course, we get swept into
Yeah.
the politics, and
Well, our
and it
genes,
gets difficult.
Our genes express themselves, and so why shouldn't our mind express themselves too? It's
Mm.
part of the human experience. And I think what I tell my students at UMass Amherst, because they're kind of buffeted
Right.
by what's happening in the political.
Yeah, and you are, I should say, welcome to the area. You just started a job at UMass Amherst, and we will hopefully be seeing more of you.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
Yes, I teach an MFA program as an assistant professor. And I tell my students, you chose this art. It's not easy to be a writer. It's not the worst thing. But you chose it because you believe that there's an inexhaustible power in carrying language, that the world can take everything from you, just like they had from the prisoners in Guantanamo. But they can't take your language. They can't take your creativity. They can't take your imagination. It's abstract, and yet it's all in you.
I think that's a perfect time to ask you if you could read us one more poem.
Absolutely.
Maybe, I think, Untitled? Does that
Sure,
work?
yeah. It's
Um,
after a Mark Rothko poem, who, of course, is coming out of the Holocaust himself and died in New York. The TV said the planes have hit the buildings. And I said yes, because you asked me to stay. Maybe we pray on our knees, because God only listens when we're this close to the devil. There's so much I want to tell you. How my greatest accolade was to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and not think of flight. How we live like water, wetting a new tongue with no telling what we've been through. They say the sky is blue, but I know it's black, seen through too much distance. You will always remember what you were doing when it hurts the most. There's so much I need to tell you, but I only earned one life. And I took nothing, like a pair of teeth at the end. The TV kept saying the planes. And I stood waiting in a room made of broken mockingbirds, their wings throbbing into 4 blurred walls. And you were there. You were the window.
My guest has been Ocean Vuong. Thank you so much for joining me today
Thank you.
on
It's a pleasure.
NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio. You can hear Ocean tonight at the University of Massachusetts at 8 p.m. in Memorial Hall. And that's going to be the kickoff for just a wonderful weekend of poetry in the Valley. We have lots going on. I want to alert people to the Pioneer Valley Poetry Productions first annual Festival of American Poets, which is at Amherst College this weekend. Many great poets, including my good friend Timothy Liu, who used to live in the area here and was part of my poetry group. but with Timothy, Forrest Gander, Cole Swenson, Ivy Shocker, Michael Heller, Pamela Stewart, Joseph Donahue, Kate Rushkin, Basil King, Martha King, and Joseph Massey will be reading. As well, the 8th Greenfield Annual Word Festival, which this year is the Great Falls Word Festival, will be produced in Turner's Falls. Most of the events at the Shea Theater, but all around town, there's at least 50 poets reading
180.
all day. 180.
Over 4 days.
So there you go. Go to gawfest.org, gawfest.org for the full list of poets. Again, my dear friend Doug Anderson is reading there. Paul Richmond puts on an amazing festival. Trish Crapo, Laurie DeRochier. It's just Straw Dog Riders, Shutesbury Riders. It's going to be a wonderful event. Friday at the Northampton Arts Council has their Visual Arts and Poetry Biennial reception at the Forbes Library. Paul Mariani is reading at the Montague Grange this Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. I'll be there. See you, Paul. And Sunday, the Gallery of Readers at Smith College, Susan O'Neill and Rosie McMahon. Sunday, at Jones Library in Amherst, the Jubilant series, Anais Duplan and Zach Savage are reading. And, of course, we're all waiting for Robert Haas to arrive in the area to read at Smith College on Friday, October 20th. So that's in Ellen Watson's amazing series at Smith College. Ocean will be reading there as well in the spring. So, put on your poetry hat and do the rounds. It's going to be a wonderful weekend. Start tonight. Hope to see everyone there. Again, this is Rich Michelson for NPR Northampton Poetry Radio.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Ocean. Talk about poetry in motion. We're going to take a break, a little displacement from our spirits, and we'll be back in a few minutes.